Good evening. Great to be learning with you on a Thursday, Yom Hamishi, Leap Day 2024, February 29th. And we're making a SIYUM, celebrating the completion of our journey through Tractate Bava, Kamma, the 21st volume of the Talmud. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house for our SIYUM? Yehudit in South Carolina. Wishing everyone congratulations. Stephen in New Hampshire. Shandor in the Bronx. Paul in the Great Northwest. Tom in Pennsylvania. Lucy in Minnesota. Bella in Florida. Jonathan in Thousand Oaks. Melissa in Great Neck. Karen in Northern California. Belle in Texas. Am Yisrael. Hi. Bill, shalom everyone. Please pray for William Watson, who was in a freak accident. May he have a refuah shlema. Joe in the Inland Empire. Sharon in New Jersey. Nancy in North Carolina. Tom, I love it. AT Daily, the clock is ticking and we're lighting up the darkness. Ella says shalom. Marjorie in Georgia. Chaim in Florida. Ilanit in Silver Spring. Welcome, everybody. Okay, our daf is page 119, the final page of Tractate Bava Kamma. And we made a little bit of a headway on this page yesterday, so we're picking it up a few paragraphs from the top. And we're continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 11. There'll be one more Mishnah that will open and close today, God willing. Okay, so Mishnah 11 said that one may not purchase wool, milk, or kid goats from the shepherds who tend the flocks of others because we're concerned that they might be selling these items without the permission of the owner of the flock. And then we saw that there's all kinds of circumstances where we would be more suspicious. For example, if they said to you, yeah, don't tell anyone that you bought it from me, so then you're not allowed to purchase it because the likelihood is high that they are stealing, and this would be stolen goods. We want nothing to do with stolen goods. On the other hand, if they're selling a large amount where it would be obvious and noticeable to the owner that it went missing, then we have good reason to believe that the shepherd is selling with the authorization of his boss, of the owner, and therefore we can buy. So these are the kinds of nuances that we are discussing. So now the Gemara examines various verses pertaining to robbers. Quote, this is from Job 27:8. For what is the hope of the godless, though he profits, when God take away his soul, right? So what is the point of living a wicked life? If you have a good sense of what's really going on in this world, right? That we are all temporarily here. We are souls. We have bodies. So what good does it really do you, to live a rich and luxurious life based on theft? If you're going to have to pay a price in the next life, very steep price for these kinds of averas, these kinds of sins. So the line from Job, for what is the hope of the godless, though he profits when God takes away his soul? And this verse is the subject of a dispute between Rav Huna and Rav Chisda. One says that the phrase, God takes away his soul, is referring not to the soul of the robber, but to the soul of the robbery victim, the robbed. And one says that it is referring to the soul of the robber. And the Gemara elaborates, the rationale of the one who says that the verse is actually referring to the soul of the robbed is as it is written from Proverbs 119, so are the ways of everyone that is greedy for profit. It takes away the life of the owner thereof, which teaches that one who robs another of his property is considered as one who robbed him of his soul. Now here, when we're talking about soul, what we're saying is that you're depriving him of life, right? Soul here is being used as the life force, right? Not so much the sort of conscious you who will, survive death from this world and go on to the next world, but the idea that when you steal from somebody, you actually shorten their lives. Right, now that obviously makes sense if we're talking about, people who are, what's that called, where, they have just enough food to survive. There are people living on the edge. So, if you steal food from somebody who is food insecure, you may very well shorten their life. But it's not only in such an obvious circumstance that the sages would teach this. Right? So when you steal property from others, don't just think, oh, they got it all, I'll take a little and never be noticed. You're actually depriving people of what they need in this world to survive. And then you say, well, the thief took the guy's Rolex. Obviously you can get by without the Rolex. Yeah, that's how it looks to you. Who knows? Maybe one day the guy will lose everything and that Rolex will be, what keeps him and his family eating. I mean, who knows? But and also there's this sense, if you've ever been robbed, sadly we were, of being violated. And one who has been violated that way is a little bit traumatized. And that's another way of removing a little bit of their life from them. So at least the straight ahead teaching here is that when you rob someone, you deprive them of something, and it's like you're stealing some of their soul energy. And the rationale of the one who says that it is referring to the soul of the robber, right? That one who, makes a profession of stealing from others will have his life shortened, perhaps in this world, perhaps in the next world, but they're definitely, they're going to lose very much from their own soul. So the rationale, the one who says that this verse from Job, the verse was, for what is the hope of the godless, though he profits when God takes away his soul? Now you could just say, well, that just means that whatever the length of his life is, when he dies, he's going to be called to account for all his deeds, including this robbery. But it might also mean that his life will be shorter than it otherwise would have been. And so here we're learning this from Proverbs 22, verses 22 and 23. Rob not the weak, because he is weak. Neither crush the poor in the gate, for the Lord will plead their cause and despoil of life those that despoil them. So particularly if you rob the poor, right? If you deprive the needy of the little that they have, God, right, in the heavenly court will look very unfavorably on that. And you might even have your life shortened. So the Gemara questions each of these opinions, right? So one said that this verse from Job refers to that when somebody steals from somebody else, you're robbing them of their soul or part of their soul. And the other one says that one who robs is losing part of his own soul. So the Gemara questions each opinion. And according to the other opinion, i.e. the latter one, right, that we're talking about he's depriving himself of his soul by robbing, isn't it also written, quote, it takes away the life of the owner thereof, which indicates that the soul of the robbed is taken. So the one who says that the one who is a robber will have his life shortened, what does he make of this verse, which seems to indicate that he's stealing soul from the robbery victim? It is referring, so the answer would be, it is referring to its current owner, i.e. the robber, who has acquired the stolen item. Right? Whatever he steals, now he's the owner thereof, in the sense that he has it in his possession, and he's the one who's going to, lose his soul or part of his soul or some of his years. And according to the other opinion, who said that the life of the robbed is what is taken, well, isn't it also written, and despoil of life, those that despoil them? So what is the one who says that it's the soul of the robbed that is taken? So what does he make of this verse, which would seem to prove that the robber loses part of his soul? And the answer is, the verse is saying, what is the reason? So the verse teaches, what is the reason that God will despoil the life of those who despoil them, meaning the poor? It is because they despoiled the soul of their victims, right? They're going to lose part of their soul because they took soul from their victims when they robbed them. And Rabbi Yochanan says, anyone who robs another of an item worth 1 peruta, right? So if you robbed another of something worth even 1 penny, is considered as though he takes his soul from him. As it is stated, so are the ways of everyone that is greedy for profit. It takes away the life of the owner thereof. Proverbs 1:19. And it states, and they shall consume your harvest and your bread. They shall consume your sons and your daughters. Jeremiah 5:17. Since they will consume the harvest and bread, it is as though they consume one's children as well, because there will be no food to feed them. Now, you never know when you're, this idea of rob from the rich, give to the poor. The ones who rob from the rich, I think, rarely give to the poor. And who knows whom you think is rich and what will actually happen to them through this robbery. And it states, Egypt shall be a desolation, and Edom shall be a desolate wilderness for the extortion of the children of Judah, because they have shed innocent blood in their land. That's from the prophet Joel, chapter 4, verse 19. And the verse here considers extortion to be like the shedding of innocent blood. In other words, taking money, even if it's by threat of violence or by threat of greater financial harm, the fact is what's being taken is money, and this is equated with shedding blood. And it states with regard to a famine, and the Lord said, it is for Saul and for his bloody house, because he put to death the Gibeonites. That's 2 Samuel 21:1. So the Gemara asks, since Rabbi Yochanan's point was proven by the first verse, what was the purpose of adding each subsequent verse by saying, and it states? And the Gemara answers, and if you would say that the robber takes only his, i.e. the victim's life, but the lives of his sons and daughters are not taken, well, come and hear the second verse, which mentions the flesh of his sons and daughters. When you rob a person, you hurt not only them, but their descendants. And if you would say this matter applies only where the robber does not give his victim compensation for the stolen item, but where he gave compensation for the stolen item, it is not comparable to murder. Come and hear the next verse, for the extortion of the children of Judah, because they have shed innocent blood in their land. Extortion is referring to coercing someone to sell an item that he does not want to sell. And it is a form of robbery, and the verse equates it with murder. Now, that doesn't mean that the punishment is the same as murder, but what they're saying to you is, don't think that because the death penalty is not attached to robbery, that it's just, an unimportant crime, right? I think that we've seen throughout this chapter and so many places and throughout this tractate what a big deal it is to take possession of any kind of ill-gotten gains. Basically, what are we learning here? You despoil yourself and you despoil the victim. And if you would say that this matter applies only where he committed the robbery by direct action, give me your money. But if he committed it through indirect action, that the transgression is not as severe, well, then come and hear the verse. It is for Saul and for his bloody house, because he put to death the Gibeonites. And where did we ever find that Saul killed the Gibeonites? He did not do so. Rather, due to the fact that he killed the residents of Nob, the city of the priests who would provide the Gibeonites with water. You can learn about this in 1 Samuel chapter 22, provide them water and food. So the verse ascribes him blame for their death as though he had killed the Gibeonites himself. New subject. The Mishnah teaches, but one may purchase specific goods from women in certain places. And the sages taught in a baraisa. Now, we've been talking about that you are not allowed to purchase from a shepherd if there's reason to suspect that the shepherd is selling the sheep or the wool or whatever that belongs to his employer without the permission of the employer. So here, ancient world, very patriarchal society, right? So the man is the authority in the household. And the wife, though they co-own everything, she doesn't have the right to unilaterally sell the husband's property without getting his authorization. So we might be concerned that, a woman might be selling goods from her household without authority to do so. So the Mishnah teaches, but one may purchase specific goods from women in certain places. And the sages taught in a baraisa, one may purchase from women woolen goods in Judea and linen goods in the Galilee, but not wines, oils, and flours, flour like flour of wheat, as these are not usually sold by women, and there is a concern that perhaps the women stole them from their husbands. So it's the kind of stuff that women typically are selling, then you don't have to worry about it. But if a woman is making a transaction in the marketplace where it would be unusual for a woman to be doing that, then you have to be concerned. If you can ascertain that she's, legally entitled to make that transaction, no problem. But you might have to do a little bit of due diligence. And no items may be purchased from slaves or from children. And Abba, for the same reason. So Abba Shaul says a woman may sell items for up to 4 and 5 dinars in order to make a cap for her head, as it is assumed that her husband allows her to sell these items in order to purchase additional articles of clothing. And with regard to all of those cases where they told the buyer to conceal his purchase, then it is prohibited to enter into the transaction. Charity collectors may take something worth a small amount from women, but not something worth a large amount, as it is possible that they do not have permission to give away expensive items. And with regard to olive pressers, one may purchase from them olives in a substantial measure and oil in a substantial measure, as there is no concern that they would steal such a large amount, right, from the clients who brought their olives to be pressed into oil at their facility. But not olives in a small amount and not oil in a small amount, because there they might be selling on the side that which really appropriately belongs to the people who brought their olives to be pressed in that facility. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says one may purchase olives in small amounts from women in the Upper Galilee, where olives are exceptionally expensive, as at times a person is embarrassed to sell olives at the entrance of his house, and so he gives some olives to his wife and she sells them. Again, so it's the custom of the place that the women are selling goods, then go ahead and buy from the women. Since there is a reason to presume that the women have been given the right to sell the olives by their husbands, and it is unlikely that the women would sell them without permission, as even a small amount missing would be noticed due to their great value, it may be assumed that the olives are being sold with permission. The Gemara relates, when Ravina arrived at Bei Mechoza, the women of Bei Mechoza came and tossed chains and bracelets before him so that he could distribute the jewelry as charity, and he accepted it from them. So Rabba Tosfa said to Ravina, but isn't it taught in a baraisa that charity collectors may accept something worth a small amount from women, but not something worth a large amount? How can you accept jewelry which is worth a significant sum? And Ravina said to him, well, for the residents of Mechoza, these chains and bracelets are considered something small, and it is therefore permitted for me to accept them, right? So if a charity collector, right, one who's collecting for a yeshiva, right, and if he's collecting in a poor neighborhood in an apartment building, and he knocks on the door and a wife says, "Oh, here, take $5,000." I'd have to be concerned, maybe she's in a fight with her husband and she says, you know what, I don't want him to have it. I'd rather give it to, the charity, and maybe she's not authorized to do that. But if he's collecting in Beverly Hills and she gives him a check for $5,000, thank you very much. That will enable many students to eat and have books, etc. Okay? So you get the picture. That concludes our discussion of Mishnah 11 here in chapter 10. And now Mishnah number 12, the final Mishnah of Tractate Bava Kamma. Strands of wool that the launderer removes from the garment belong to him, as it can be assumed that the customer is uninterested in them. But strands that the carder, i.e. one who prepares wool for use as a textile, removes belong to the customer, as it is assumed that the customer would want them, since the carder often removes a significant number of strands, right? So get the picture. I don't know if this is so, but just imagine, if you take clothes to a dry cleaner or a laundry facility, certainly a laundromat, right, and you clean out those machines, there's going to be a significant amount of, what's that stuff? My memory. What do you call that stuff that piles up in the bottom of dryers, right? Like it's just like the little bits that fall off clothing in the dryer cycle, like silt? No, lilt? I can't remember the word. Lint. Thank you, Tom. Lint. So the lint that piles up in the dryer, nobody wants that, right? People take it to the laundromat. They don't clean out the lint drawer themselves. So, if the guy who's running the laundromat is cleaning out the lint, and he acquires enough of it that he could use it, to stuff pillows, good for him. He's being entrepreneurial and he hasn't done anything wrong. On the other hand, if you're in the business of making clothing, you're a manufacturer, right? And so first you buy, let's say, a bunch of raw wool or raw cotton, and you take it, like this part of the factory you don't do yourself, you take it to a contractor, and he's going to take the raw wool and make that into strands, into thread, into what you need in order to start, the next part of the process. And there's some amount of excess that kind of falls off as the threads are being made, and there's value to that. Well, this is already a guy in the rag trade, right? He's in the garment business, and he can make use of what falls off in that first facility. So the guy who's processing the raw wool into thread, or into yarn, he can't assume that the manufacturer who brought it to him wouldn't want that. It's his, and he's entitled to it, right? So that's the difference between a launderer and a carder. Now, a launderer takes 3 threads that were inserted at the edge of a garment, and they are his. But with regard to more threads than this, these additional threads belong to the customer. And if these were black threads on a white garment, he takes all of them and they are his, as the removal of the threads improves the appearance of the garment and the customer does not want them. So this is kind of interesting. We get a little peek into the ancient world here. And we've seen this elsewhere in Tractate Shabbos when we were talking about when is a garment completed, right? So when the weavers, would manufacture a garment, they would leave, and still you see today when you buy a suit, right? The pockets are sewn shut, which sort of keeps the garment, the integrity of the garment while it's being shipped and tried on and eventually gets sold. But when you buy a suit, you can usually just wear it. I mean, after it's altered, right, then you can wear it. But in these ancient times, the garments that you would buy, the material would often be very coarse, very stiff and uncomfortable. So the first thing that you would do is take it to the launderer, not so much to clean it as to soften it, right? Now, through that first cycle in the laundry, so that the edges of the garment don't get frayed, because that's a kind of, hardcore laundering. The manufacturer would sew additional threads on the edge of the garment just to protect it from fraying in that first laundering, right? And then after the first laundering, where future launderings aren't going to be so intense, it wouldn't need those threads. So what they're saying is the launderer can keep those threads that were really just there for that first laundering cycle. But beyond that, they cannot keep. Now, what we're seeing here, and we should be reminded, in the Midrash teaches that in the story of Jacob coming back, right, with his family after being away for 20 years and now encountering his brother Esau for the first time, right? And Esau wanted to kill Yaakov when Yaakov left because he took the birthright, the birthright, and then the blessing from their father Yitzhak. And Yaakov is very afraid to meet Esav. And the night before they meet, he wrestles with the angel all night, and it's as a result of that incident that Yaakov's name is changed to Yisrael. Now, where he has that wrestling match with the angel is on the other side of the Yarden, right, of the Jordan River, and his family's already come across. So why did he go back? Why was he over there alone on the other side of the river? And the Midrash teaches it's because he left a few small clay vessels, and he went back to get them. Now, at this point, Yaakov is a pretty wealthy guy. He's got many kids, 4 wives, lots of flocks, which is really how wealth was measured. He's got money. He's a well-to-do person. Why does he go back for a few clay vessels? And we're meant to learn out from that, that we, no matter how well we're doing or how poorly we're doing, we should be very frugal and careful with our possessions. Now, that doesn't mean that we should be attached to our possessions and should be materialistic about it. But what it means is that we should be very grateful for whatever we have and not take anything for granted, and therefore not be wasteful. And in fact, it is considered a transgression to be wasteful and to destroy things or discard things unnecessarily. Should you be a hoarder? Absolutely not. Discarding things when they're old, used up, and to make room in your house so that you can live nicely and not be a hoarder, that is a perfectly good reason to get rid of something when its time is past. But to just be wasteful and cavalier about possessions is wrong. And here we're seeing that now we're extending that kind of idea to this law of robbery, right? And so even when you think, oh, well, who's going to care, if I just gather this for myself, these threads, these bits of lint. I mean, if you don't have a right to it and somebody else does and might, not that they would want it, but that they might want it and it is theirs, don't for a second think that you have a right to take it because it seems insignificant. The laws of robbery apply to anything, no matter how seemingly insignificant. If it's not yours, if you don't have a right to it, it's not yours and you don't have a right to it. There's the principle. Okay. Now, in the case of a tailor who left enough thread attached to the cloth that it could be used in order to sew with it, or if there was a patch of cloth that is 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths left from the cloth given to the tailor by the customer, what do you think? These items belong to the customer. And we learned elsewhere, or we will learn again, that a piece of cloth that's 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths is considered a cloth that is significant enough that it can become tameh, it can become ritually impure. So certainly it's significant enough that if the tailor at the end of making the garment has this much material left over, he can't keep it, it belongs to the customer. If the customer doesn't want it, wants to give it to him, fine. But he can't assume that it became his. It doesn't. Now, that which a carpenter removes with an adze belongs to him. Meaning, you go to a carpenter, you want him to build something for you, whether it's furniture or a house or whatever, and so he has to carve some wood. Now, an adze, it's like an axe, except that if this is the handle, right, and the handle is going to move this way. So an axe has a blade that is oriented the same way. An adze has a blade that's oriented this way. So the handle swings this way, but the blade is perpendicular and usually smaller, right? And it's used, for the kind of like the initial work before you get into the finer work with, finer, smaller chisels. The adze is going to take away the largest amount of wood when you're carving the wood in order to make, the furniture, or the moldings in a house, whatever it is. What's the value of these wood scrapings that you knock off with the adze? Well, they could be used as kindling wood, and in a society that heated its house with a wood fire, very useful item. So the carpenter can't assume that it belongs to him. So that which a carpenter removes with an adze, that belongs to him because the adze removes only small shavings of wood, which the customer is uninterested in. But what he removes with an axe belongs to the customer. And if he was doing this work in the domain of the customer, then even the sawdust belongs to the customer, right? Even the sawdust We're talking about small things. You got to be careful, right? And this is why we've learned elsewhere that when you die and you leave this world and you appear before the heavenly tribunal, right, where you're going to be judged and told what is your destiny in the world to come, right, where there's an infinite number of levels where you could end up. They will ask you certain questions, right? The first question is, were you honest in your business dealings? Meaning, were you honest in these small things that nobody else would notice when it was only, God was looking? Were you honest? And the second one was, did you make regular times for Torah study? Thank God we're learning together at the same time every day. Okay, that is Mishnah number 12. Now the Gemara, the final Gemara that will bring us to the SIYUM. The sages taught in a baraisa, one may purchase strands of wool from a launderer because they are assumed to be his. A launderer may take the two upper threads of a garment and they are his. The ones that were, held the garment together for his laundering. 119b. And a carder should not place in a piece of cloth more than 3 stitches for each loop that he attaches to the cloth in order to stretch it out, as this causes the cloth to overstretch and require trimming. And he should not card the cloth along its warp, i.e. vertically, but rather along its weft, i.e. horizontally, because he's going to remove less material. And he may even out the cloth by cutting it along its length, but not along its width. And if he comes to even out the cloth by removing up to a handbreadth of material, it is permitted for him to do so. So now you got the picture of a weaver, right? The warp is the vertical threads that right. So it's the warp is the vertical threads that kind of go like this. When he moves his foot pedal. I believe, and then the weft is the horizontal thread that he throws through on the shuttle, right? And then all the threads switch, and then he throws the shuttle through again, and that's how they weave an expanse of cloth. Have you ever seen weaving in the traditional way? If I'm wrong about the warp and the weft, I apologize, and somebody will let me know. Okay, the Gemara analyzes the baraisa. The master said in the baraisa that the launderer may take 2 threads, but didn't we learn in the Mishnah that the launderer may take 3 threads? And the Gemara answers, La kasha, this is not difficult. The ruling of this baraisa, which allows only 2 threads, is stated with regard to thick threads. And the ruling of that Mishnah, which allows 3 threads, is stated with regard to thin ones. Again, there's going to be the customs of particular industries and particular regions of how the carders work. What the sages are legislating is how you should be careful to not misappropriate something that doesn't belong to you. It was also stated in the baraisa, and he should not card the cloth along its warp, but along its weft. And the Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in another baraisa that the opposite is the law? The Gemara answers, this is not difficult. The ruling of this baraisa, which prohibits carding along the warp, is stated with regard to an ordinary garment, which is designed for durability, and one should therefore avoid wearing out the material by carding along the warp. And the ruling of that baraisa, which allows one to card along the warp, is stated with regard to an elegant cape, which is made for aesthetic appearance and is therefore improved by carding it in this manner. The Gemara examines the next clause of the baraisa, and a carder should not place in a cloth more than 3 stitches for each loop. And Rabbi Yirmiyah raised a dilemma with regard to the definition of the term stitch in this context. Does drawing the needle in and out constitute 1 stitch? Or perhaps does drawing the needle in and out constitute 2 stitches? And the Gemara responds, Teku, this shall stand unresolved. And it was further stated in the baraisa, and he may even out the cloth by cutting it along its length, but not along its width. The Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in another baraisa that the opposite is true? And the Gemara answers that this is not difficult. The statement of this baraisa, which rules that one should even out the cloth along its length, this is stated with regard to a garment where an uneven length would be conspicuous. And the statement of that baraisa, which rules that one should even it out along its width, is stated with regard to a belt, as the width of a belt is more noticeable than its length while it is being worn. And the Gemara cites a baraisa that discusses which items may be purchased from a carder. And the sages taught in a baraisa, one may not purchase strands of thread from a carder because it is assumed that they are not his. And in a place where the residents were accustomed to allow carders to retain strands, then the strands may be presumed to be his, and one may purchase them. And in every place, one may purchase from them a cushion full of stuffing made from strands, or a mattress full of stuffing made from strands, And what is the reason that this is permitted? The reason is that even if the carter had stolen the strands, once he uses them to make a cushion or a mattress, he has acquired them through a change of form. Right? Now, this doesn't mean that if he misappropriated goods, he will not face consequences because he, through his labor, transformed them into something else, from loose strands into a stuffed cushion. Rather, that because of his work, he acquired possession of them and changed them into something else that can't be returned to the original owner. So now if you buy it from him, you, the innocent purchaser, are not going to have to cough it up. But the one who robbed, he's always going to remain responsible to, make restitution from whom he took it. And we've learned this before, why it matters that when there's a change of form, an acquisition is created. Apropos the laws pertaining to weaving, the Gemara cites a baraisa that discusses which items may be purchased from various craftsmen. And the sages taught in a baraisa, one may purchase from a weaver neither woolen wads, known as irin, which are used to hold the bobbin in place on a shuttle, nor heddles, known as nirin, nor threads of the bobbin, known as punkalin, nor remnants of coils of thread that were left on the spool, as there is a concern that these items were taken from the customer without his consent. But one may purchase a spotted garment from them, even though the design indicates that it was made from strands of different colors, which the weaver may have stolen from other garments that he was weaving, and it is also permitted to purchase warp threads and weft threads from them, as well as wool that was spun into thread or woven. All of these items may be purchased from the weaver because they have undergone a physical change and have therefore been acquired by the weaver, even if he did steal them. Again, he remains obligated to make restitution and atonement for anything that he stole, but now that they're changed into something else, the innocent purchaser isn't doing something wrong by buying them. Now the Gemara asks, say, now that the Baraisa taught that one may purchase spun wool, despite the fact that it has undergone only a minor physical change, is it necessary to teach that one may purchase woven wool, which has undergone a greater change of form? And the Gemara answers, what does the Baraisa mean when it mentions woven wool? It is not referring to wool woven into a garment, but rather to wool that was twisted into chains, which is also a minor physical change. And the Gemara examines which items may be bought from a dyer. The sages taught in a baraisa, one may purchase from a dyer neither pieces of wool used for tests, nor pieces used as a color sample, nor detached pieces of wool, as these might have been stolen. But one may purchase from him a colored garment, spun threads, and clothes fashioned from the aforementioned pieces of material. And the Gemara asks, now that the Baraisa taught that one may purchase spun threads from the dyer, is it necessary to teach that one may purchase clothes? It is obvious that one may purchase clothes if the clothes themselves are made of spun threads. And the Gemara explains, what does the Baraisa mean when it mentions clothes? It is referring to felt garments, which are not made of spun thread, right? That's all of the loose lint crushed together. That's what felt is. Now, the sages taught in a Baraisa, in the case of one who gives hides to a tanner, the trimmings of hide and the detached hairs belong to the customer, but the substance that comes up while being washed in water belongs to him, the tanner. New subject, the Mishna teaches that if the threads were black on a white garment, the launderer may take all of them. It's obvious that these black threads were put there in black so that it's easy to see where they are and it's easy to remove them, since their only purpose was to hold the garment together through that initial laundering. Rav Yehuda said a launderer is called a katzra in Aramaic, and he takes the short katzra, shreds of wool, for himself. That's why he's called a katzra. And Rav Yehuda also said all the threads, even those usually removed from the garment, are counted toward the minimum number of thumb lengths between the hole through which the sky blue wool, the techelis, is inserted for tzitzis on the edge of a garment, right? So I'm wearing tzitzis under my shirt. Tzitzis are the ritual fringes that a Jewish man is obligated to wear. And they don't go on all pieces of clothing. They only go on a four-cornered garment, sort of like a poncho, right? It has a hole in the middle, and it has the four corners. And, we wear that under our outer shirt. right? Now the tzitzis, which are the fringes themselves, they need to be near the corner. How near and what is not too near, right? So they need to be a certain number of thumb lengths. That's what we just read. Right, was it 3 thumb lengths? Is that what we just said? Well, the minimum number of thumb lengths between the hole through which the tzitzis is inserted, and why they're talking about tehelis. Right now, this is kind of back in the last, I don't know, 50 to 100 years. We're using the blue thread within our tzitzis again, as it was in ancient times. But they lost the identity of the snail from which they took the blue ink. It's a kind of sea snail, to make the techelis, to make that sky blue thread that is included in our tzitzis. And so then they said, and plus only the rich people could afford it. So at a certain point in ancient times, they said, you know what, we're going to make them all white. And even though the Torah says that there needs to be techelis in the tzitzis, the sages actually overruled that because it became impossible for everyone to have that. Now, in modern times, a certain number of people, even in the very religious world, are convinced that they have the right snail to get that blue ink. And so, for example, my talis that is in the house, I have the blue thread in the tzitzis of my prayer shawl. But like what I wear for daily wear, that most people don't have the blue thread in that. At any rate, when they're talking about here is that when we say that the garment, will start to lose some threads from its edge. Well, if the garment, loses enough threads from its edge, then excuse me, the tzitzis will be too close to the corner, too close to the edge, because the garment has essentially shrunk, and now the hole for the tzitzis is too close to the edge. So they're telling you that you need to be aware of that. Be careful. So Rav Yehud also said all the threads, even those usually removed from the garment, are counted toward the minimum number of thumb lengths between the hole through which the techelis is inserted for tzitzis in the edge of the garment. But Yitzchak, my son, is particular about these threads and makes sure that the garment is of the proper measurement, even if the threads were to be removed. So I guess he's saying it's fine as long as when it's new, it's the right distance if you lose a little bit over the life of the garment. But he says his son is machmir. His son is more stringent and makes sure that the garment is a little extra wide at the beginning so that when it loses these threads, it will end up at the minimum. Now the Mishna teaches, in the case of a tailor who left enough thread attached to the cloth in order to sew with it, the thread belongs to the customer. And the Gemara asks, and how much thread is necessary in order to be able to sew? And Rav Asi said the length of a needle outside the needle. And a dilemma was raised before the sages. Did Rav Asi mean that the thread must be the size of the needle? And that beyond the needle, there must be an additional amount of thread equivalent to the size of the needle? Or perhaps he meant that it must be the size of the needle, and that beyond the needle, there must be any minimal amount of additional string. In other words, was Rav Asi saying that the thread must be 2 needle lengths or slightly more than 1 needle length? I mean, we're talking about what is considered a significant amount of thread, such that you can't misappropriate it. And so the answer is going to be like either this much or that much. I mean, thread, right? That's how careful you have to be to maintain your integrity and honesty. Now the Gemara responds, come in here, resolution, as it is taught in a Baraisa, in the case of a tailor who left the thread attached to the cloth, but it was less than the length necessary in order to sew with it, or there was a patch of cloth that is less than 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths left from the cloth given to the tailor by the customer, the law is dependent upon the customer's inclination. When the customer is particular about such items, these items belong to the customer. But if the customer is not particular about them, these items belong to the tailor. And by the way, let's not be too quick to sort of like chuckle that they're being so particular about something so small. Think about like when your garment, a few years down the line needs some mending, right? And then you can't find that kind of thread, that color, that thickness. So then you can't mend it with an invisible, stitch, right? Whatever you bring in is going to show a little bit. But if it came with some extra thread at the from the beginning, so that's the thread that you can use, you make a little stitch and fix it in the future. So it's quite useful, right? Now the Gemara analyzes the Baraisa to deduce the answer. Granted, if you say that Rav Asi meant to say that the thread must be the size of the needle, and that beyond the needle there must be an additional amount of thread equivalent to the size of the needle, then the ruling of the Baraisa that a slightly shorter thread belongs to the customer if he wishes to keep it is reasonable, since a thread which is less than that length is still fit for use as the stitching of a loop. But if you say that Rav Asi meant that the thread must be the size of the needle and that beyond the needle there must be any amount of additional string, then with regard to a thread that is even less than that, for what use is it fit that the customer might wish to keep it? And rather learn from the Baraisa that Rav Asi meant that the thread must be the size of the needle and that beyond the needle there must be an additional amount of thread equivalent to the size of the needle, so you need 2 needle lengths, so that the thread must be a total of 2 needle lengths. And the Gemara conclude that this is so. I'm almost done, and then once we finish, we'll recite the blessings that we say at the conclusion of a tractate, and then we'll just say the opening line of the next tractate, Bava Metzia, and then we'll drink a l'chaim together. So the Mishnah teaches that which the carpenter removes with an adze belongs to him, but what he removes with an axe belongs to the customer. So the Gemara raises a contradiction to this ruling based upon a Baraisa. That which the carpenter removes with an adze and that which is severed with a saw belongs to the customer. But with regard to that which comes from under a drill or under a plane, and that which is scraped by the saw, i.e. sawdust, these belong to the carpenter. Whereas the Mishnah rules that the carpenter may keep what is removed with an adze, the Baraisa rules that it belongs to the customer. And the Gemara presents an answer. Rava said, in the place of the Tana of our Mishnah, where he lived, there are 2 kinds of blades used by carpenters. And the larger blade is called an axe, and the smaller one is called an adze. By contrast, in the place of the Tana of our Baraisa, there is only 1 carpenter's blade, and they call it an adze. Consequently, the adze referred to in the Baraisa is actually an axe, and the rulings are therefore congruent. And the Mishnah teaches that if he was doing his work in the domain of the customer, then even the sawdust belongs to the customer. And the sages taught in a Baraisa, stone chiselers are not in violation of a transgression due to the prohibition against robbery if they take the leftover chips of rock. Furthermore, with regard to those who prune trees, those who prune vines, those who trim shrubs, those who weed plants, and those who hoe vegetables, the law is dependent upon the owner's inclination. When the owner is particular about the plant trimmings, he wants to keep them as kindling or as feed for his animals, then the workers are in violation of a transgression due to the prohibition against robbery if they take the trimmings. But if the owner is not particular about them, then these items belong to the workers. Rav Yehuda says dodder and green grain are not subject to the prohibition against robbery as they grow on their own and no one tends to them. But in a place where people are particular about the ownership of dodder and green grain, they are subject to the prohibition against robbery. And Ravina said, and the city of Mechasya is a city where the residents are particular about dodder and green wheat. So that's where we finish this tractate. Again, I think bringing home the lesson, be particular, be honest, never assume that something is yours for the taking if in fact there's any possibility that you might be misappropriating it. Live a life of integrity. Okay, now we say the blessings at the conclusion of a tractate. And then we'll start the next tractate, and then we'll make a l'chaim, and then while we're drinking our l'chaim, we'll take a look at some questions. Okay, so we say this whenever we finish a tractate. The first paragraph we say 3 times. We shall return to you, tractate Bava Kamma, and your glory is upon us. Our thoughts are upon you, tractate Bava Kamma, and your thoughts are upon us. We will not be forgotten from you, tractate Bava Kamma, and you will not be forgotten from us, neither in this world nor in the world to come. We shall return to you, tractate Bava Kamma, and your glory is upon us. Our thoughts are upon you, tractate Bava Kamma, and your thoughts are upon us. We will not be forgotten from you, tractate Bava Kamma, and you will not be forgotten from us, neither in this world nor in the world to come. We shall return to you, tractate Bava Kamma, and your glory is upon us. Our thoughts are upon you, tractate Bava Kamma, and your thoughts are upon us. We shall not be forgotten from you, tractate Bava Kamma, and you will not be forgotten from us, neither in this world nor in the world to come. May it be your will, Lord our God and God of our ancestors, that your Torah will be our avocation in this world and will accompany us to the world to come. And now we mentioned the sons of Bar Papa, very successful man in the sense that he was a sage and his 10 sons were sages too. He really transmitted his values to them. Chanina Bar Papa, Rami Bar Papa, Nachman Bar Papa, Achai Bar Papa, Abamari Bar Papa, Rafram Bar Papa, Rakshish Bar Papa, Surcha Bar Papa, Ada Bar Papa, Daru Bar Papa. Like really bringing home the message of that this teaching, this learning that we've been doing for thousands of years is really links the generations and keeps us Jewish. Please, Lord our God, may the words of your Torah be sweet in our mouths and please, Lord our God, make the words of your Torah sweet in our mouths and in the mouths of your people, the house of Israel, so that we, our descendants and their descendants and the descendants of your people, the house of Israel, may all know your name and study your Torah for its own sake. Your commandments make me wiser than my enemies, for they are ever with me. Let my heart be undivided in your statutes, in order that I may not be put to shame. I will never forget your precepts, for with them you have quickened me. Blessed are you, O Lord. Teach me your statutes. Amen, amen, amen. Selah forever. Nina, is that orange chair in your office? If not, we'll pull up this one. We give thanks before you, Lord our God and God of our ancestors, that you have placed our lot among those who sit in the study hall, and that you have not given us our portion among those who sit idly on street corners. We rise early and they rise early. We rise early to pursue matters of Torah, and they rise early to pursue frivolous matters. We toil and they toil. We toil and receive reward, and they toil and do not receive reward. We run and they run. We run to the life of the world to come, and they run to the pit of destruction. As it is stated, but you, God, will bring them down into the pit of destruction. Men of bloodshed and deceit shall not live out half their days, but as for me, I will trust in you. There's a little more, but let me make way for the beautiful Nina. There you go. Come on in. Oops. I'm loud enough. I'm sure it'll pick me up. Okay. May it be your will, Lord, my God, just as you've assisted me in completing tractate Bava Kamma, so assist me to begin other tractates and books and conclude them, to learn and to teach, to observe and to perform and to fulfill the teachings of your Torah with love. And may the merit of all the Tanaim and Amoraim and Torah scholars stand for me and my descendants, so that the Torah will not move from my mouth and from the mouths of my descendants and the descendants of my descendants forever. And may the verse, when you walk it shall lead you, when you lie down it shall watch over you, and when you awaken it shall talk with you, be fulfilled in me. For in the Torah your days shall be multiplied, and the years of your life shall be increased. Length of days is in her right hand, and in her left hand are riches and honor. May the Lord give strength to his people. The Lord will bless his people with peace.
Amen.
Okay, beautiful. And then as soon as we finish a tractate, we always immediately open the next one. So this is tractate Bava Metzia is the next one. And as I've mentioned in posts recently and in class, this is the traditional starting place for young people, learn in yeshiva. I was talking to my friend Eli Sharf today, and I asked him, when did you start learning Bava Metzia? He said in 5th grade, right? So they don't learn it all the way through. And in fact, they don't start with chapter 1. They start with chapter 2, which is the general law of one who finds a lost item, how he's meant to return it. But Bava Metzia actually begins with the very famous case of two people who find a garment, usually a talis, a prayer shawl. They both find it, and they both claim that they're the one who found it first, and they're entitled to it. So they're clinging to it, and what do we do with them? Okay, so we always begin on page 2. Every tractate begins on page 2. And the first line of the Mishna of tractate Bava Metzia, if two people came to court holding a garment, right, a talis, and this one, the first litigant says, I found it. And that one, the second litigant says, I found it. And this one says, all of it is mine. And that one says, no, all of it is mine. How does the court adjudicate this case? This one takes an oath that he does not have ownership of less than half of it. And that one takes an oath that he does not have ownership of less than half of it. And they divide it. And we'll pick that up tomorrow.
I'm sure it doesn't end there. I'm sure that's not the final word on that situation.
I think that is safe to say. All right, let us.
Well, here we are. We finished another tractate. Mazel tov, everybody.
Nina, you have said many times that you wouldn't ordinarily go out of your way necessarily to be learning Talmud every day, an hour a day,
Never.
and doing Daf Yomi.
My brain doesn't work that way.
So it might not be your thing, but here you are listening to the class, monitoring comments every day.
Kicking and streaming.
For years, and against your will, you're becoming a Talmudist. You are an accidental Talmudist.
I'm really accidental. But I got to say, this past one, Bava Kamma, there was a lot of good, meaty stuff that was relevant to our lives. Some of the tractates are a little less so. So this one, I think, had some good things. One thing that really, there's a few things that struck me about this tractate. One of them was that the exceptional care that the sages took to figure out what are the rights of the heir of a robber. Because you'd think like, well, the guy's a robber. Who cares about his kids? Heirs? Well, it's irrelevant. But they, the kids didn't steal anything. But the fact that they're so concerned with every person in society, and and a robber has heirs. That was one thing that struck me. And also, back when we were talking about public humiliation and how you determine what kind of the humiliation was it, and what's owed, to the person that was humiliated, etc. One other thing I was thinking is, the benefit, the importance of confessing and apologizing, and how different the liability is if you don't apologize. And what we were learning, I think maybe yesterday, about how, well, what if the theft wasn't discovered and you return it before the theft is discovered, or you confess?
And Rabbi Kiva says you have to tell.
Right.
That you took. Even if you're restoring.
Right. There's just so much good stuff in there. And all the lost objects thing, I'm looking forward to learning more about that, because that could not be more relevant. I mean, I feel like every single day there's something I lose, and I have started doing something when I lose something, as I say, please God, just as you know where my keys are, please show me where they are. But luckily I have God created tile, so now I have that to help me when I lose my keys.
It's funny what you just mentioned about that the sages were concerned for the heir of a robber. Right, so this week's Torah portion, very big Torah portion, Kisisa, or some would say Kitisa, includes the golden calf, also includes the attributes of God. When Moses said to God, show me your glory, and and God says, you can't see my face and live, but I'll put you in this cleft in the rock, and my glory will pass before you. I'll cover you with my hand. My glory will pass before you, and you'll be able to see me from behind. It's very mystical, certainly not face value type of passage. But then God recites his attributes, right? The Lord, slow to anger, compassionate, etc., who remembers kindness for thousands of generations, for 2,000 generations, but who visits the iniquity of the wicked upon their descendants for the third and fourth generation, right? So that would seem to imply, are they being punished for the sins of their fathers, right? And so it's a very difficult passage. And I forget who was the Rebbe or the sage that said this, but that is not some kind of heaven-sent punishment. That's the natural consequence of the actions of the wicked, that they hurt their children, and that they, sort of besmirch the family name, and even the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren suffer. So the sages were actually trying to alleviate maybe a little bit of that suffering from the passage you mentioned. All right, and were there some questions that you passed
Sharon
over?
had a couple of comments.
Okay, so I'll come back to that. Let's make a l'chaim. So my friends, well done. We've come to the end of another tractate together. We're well past the halfway point in our journey through Daf Yomi. And as we've begun and completed this tractate, so may we begin and complete many more tractates until we reach the final SIYUM, God willing, in 2027.
Amen.
Chaim.
L'chaim, everybody.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol niyeh b'diburo.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol niyeh b'diburo.
Amen. It's a very nice tequila.
Ooh, that is good. Very rich.
This Shabbos is my daughter's 19th bat mitzvah anniversary. Holds very special meaning for me, says
beautiful.
Sharon.
There was a lot of talk about weaving and quilting. Yeah, that's spurred
Some expertise in our community.
People with different
That's
experiences.
great.
Yeah.
Sharon says something that has material value to one person has sentimental value as well to another. I had a piece of jewelry that was stolen from me that likely had material value to the thief, but was a legacy piece of my mother's given to me by my dad after she passed away, and it hurts me still to this day.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can relate. And Sharon also says, my class made talitot, right, so made prayer shawls, and learned about tying tzitzis, the fringes on the corners. And I got the threads from Israel, and they came with a disclaimer that the people who made them had to have special intention of the holiness of their use while making them. And I found that really significant.
Intentionality is so important.
So important.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful comment. Maybe some other comments have been added. I think that's it. Okay. And over on the YouTube side. Great. And people were talking about quilting and weaving. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, and if you're ever in Tzfat, the holy city of Tzfat in northern Israel.
So beautiful. I love Tzfat.
It's beautiful.
Anybody
right?
that's ever been to Tzfat says, "Oh, I love Tzfat. That's my favorite place."
It's beautiful. It's mystical.
Yeah, it's
and
blue.
It's blue, and there's very much kind of an artist community there. A craftsman community,
artists and mystics and
mystics and sculptors, and especially like people who make taluses, right? And so you can see them weaving it with very high quality thread, very high quality wool. Beautiful, beautiful taluses that they make there. And then you can see that setup, it's definitely always made in the old-fashioned way. It is not machine woven at all. It's all handmade. Just beautiful. My friend Dovi brought one back. It's gorgeous. I'm thinking the next time I'm in Israel.
Yeah.
Sadly, the last time I was in Sfat, I just got food sick that day.
Oh, that's right.
And I did not have a good visit.
Oh, I forgot that. You were so sick, but just for one day. Yeah.
But that would be nice to get back. Okay, so tomorrow's class is at the regular Friday time, noon. And, I posted recently that this is a great place to jump in. Tell your friends. Or maybe you're visiting with us today and you've been thinking about jumping in and actually doing Daf Yomi. And on the post that I put on Instagram and Facebook, a bunch of people said, I'm in. So we're going to have some new members of our AT Daily community, God willing, starting tomorrow. And we'll be sure to make them feel welcome.
And there's something else, actually, that you can jump into, which is Nach Yomi. So Nach Yomi Tanakh is the entire Hebrew Bible, and Nach Yomi is we do one chapter a day of everything, not the Chumash, not the first 5 books of Moses, but everything else starting with the book of Joshua. And
Nach is Nevi'im and Ketuvim.
Correct. Yeah.
The prophets and the writings.
So that started. We just finished the book of Joshua. We're now 5 chapters in of the book of Judges, Shoftim. But we're still, kind of close to the beginning of Nach. So if you're interested in jumping in on that, I learn with OU Women's Initiative. So there's a women teacher every day that delivers a short shiur, like maybe 10 or 15 or 20 minutes that I listen to at 1.5 speed, so it goes pretty quick. Or you could do OU Torah, which is for everybody. So just wanted to put that out there. For me, it's more accessible Bible than Talmud, so it's great to have both in your lives.
Yeah, and just so you know, my plan, God willing, when we complete Daf Yomi in about 3 years, is after that I'm going to do Tanakh Yomi, right? So my plan is to do a chapter of the Hebrew Bible a day.
Right, that's
and that'll take us about 3 years.
So great. so rich. So yeah.
And it's awesome, you know.
Yeah.
It's awesome, and there we'll really look a little bit more into the Hebrew and other sources, and it's much less each day, so we'll be able to bring in more commentary, a little bit closer discussion, so a shorter class, a little bit greater depth on what material we're covering that day. I guess except for Psalm 119. That's a very long chapter to do in one day. But most chapters are much shorter.
Yeah. So let's remember to just smile for the camera so we can get a thumbnail. It's always so hard to find a thumbnail where, one doesn't have our mouth open or a weird expression. So it's important to get that thumbnail.
Influencer
Gotta have
problems.
the thumbnail.
Okay, my friends, so great to be learning with you. I hope you're enjoying your L'chaim. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow at the regular time, the regular Friday time, noon Pacific. All the best.